I want to make sure to acknowledge my many colleagues in the writing program. You know, we are a robust group. We as the conference, we knew we had space and budget for 200 people, and we hit 200 people, and we've had to say no to people. So anything of this complexity depends on lots of people pitching in. You see names of the steering committee here. There were, to a person, my colleagues have helped. You've seen them around staffing tables and so on today. I believe Lauren Salvador is not here, but Lauren is the program's office manager. And looking around here, I know there are a lot of you who have done conferences, and you know that last 2 weeks, the just minutia that overwhelms, and Lauren has been instrumental in that. So do thank her when you see her at the reception. Oh, there she's coming in right now. I'll give her a shout. Also, this conference we were able to keep free to 4C's members. The 4C's executive committee gave us $7,000. That's great. The University of Denver pitched in $9,000. So it was a really nice collaboration, and appreciate that, and glad to see so many there. While I'm on that note, there are several former 4C's chairs in this room. Here is Kathy Yancey. Here is Howard Tinberg. Linda Adler-Kastner is there. Let's see. Well, Carolyn, I'm going to say something about. She's not past. There are also 3 or 4 past TICA chairs here. So we have Sharon Mitchler here. We have Carolyn, who's also, we have Howard, were you ever a TICA chair? Okay, so you came through the college. Jody Millward, anyway, so I was really pleased to know that you know, people who have been historical leaders in the organization saw fit to support our modest little deal in Denver, and we're happy to see you here. This, by the way, is my favorite flower in Colorado. I mean, I love the columbines, you know those. This is called the shooting star. It's about this long, and I don't know, Bud, did you see any shooting stars? Okay, yeah, they're around. But I just like it, they're so surprising. Let's see, any more housekeeping? I don't think so. Oh, if you want to go to the Rockmount store, it was started by the guy who invented the Western Snap shirt. He was its CEO until he was 101, and in the office. But this is a place where people who come to play at Red Rocks, so Mick Jagger has these shirts. There's a wide array of shirts. So if you want to be just ostentatious 2 or 3 times a year, this is my quotient. You can go down there, and it's a real hoot. But it's Rockmount is the place. So, and Mike, is Libby Catchings here? My colleague Libby has a shirt just like this. We should have collaborated. Lauren, did you just come back in with? Oh, she's out. She's elusive. Anyway, we'll thank her individually. So I've asked our current 4C's chair, Carolyn Calhoun-Dillahunt, if she might introduce Howard. And I just told her, you know, I had glommed this picture. This was right after her chair's address. And I said, I tried to find the coldest picture I had on my computer. And this is my wife and one of our dogs at Timberline last January. So just to reassure you that it's not always hot in Colorado. So Carolyn, please.
If you were at C's, you know that I need I've learned that I need a lighted backlit screen because I cannot read my speech from print at all. So Howard Tinberg actually needs no introduction, but he certainly merits one. And for me, it's an honor to have this opportunity. He's not only a personal role model, but he epitomizes what it means to be a teacher scholar for two-year colleges and for the field of writing studies. I first came to know Howard as a rock star in the among two-year college faculty through my work with TICA. Initially through reading his border talk, writing and knowing the two-year college, hearing him keynote at some TICA regional conferences, and seeing his enactment of two-year college teacher scholarship and his editorship of the Teaching English in the Two-Year College Journal. And then later I had the privilege of working with him directly as I became more involved in TICA roles. And that includes his and his committee's groundbreaking work on a position statement, and he was also involved in the revision of the position statement 5 years later on the research and scholarship in the two-year college. And so this has been really foundational for two-year college faculty. Of course, he continued the exemplification of his being a two-year college, or excuse me, of being a teacher's college scholar through his active scholarly agenda, which includes a vast array of publications in the field through all our major scholarly journals. It includes authorship or co-authorship or co-editorship of a range of pieces, including Writing with Consequence, what writing does in the disciplines, what is college-level writing, and a Volume 2 version of that, and Community College Expectations. His work breaks the stereotype of two-year college faculty as, and this is quoting from him in a long ago piece called We Do Theory, the old tired construction of two-year college faculty as workhorse teachers with little time or inclination to engage in research and theory. So it's no wonder that he, in 2015, got the TETYC Mark Reynolds Best Article Award for his work on transfer. And it's no wonder that he was recognized as U.S. Community College Professor of the Year by the Carnegie Academy for Teaching and Learning in 2004. His work continues to shape the field. He's a former SEAS chair. He studied writing and transfer and the public work of composition, which was the theme of his convention. And he grounds his talk today, teaching and research in the age of fake news, in some of these long working efforts that he's done in his scholarly work throughout his career. So thank you, Howard, for...
Can you all hear me? I'm told I don't have to actually get too close to the mics. It's wonderful to be here. It's great to see old friends and to make new friends. On the morning after the last presidential election, I felt that I had failed as an educator, truly. I had spent decades in the classroom emphasizing the values of clear and incisive thinking, had promoted the occupation of an informed citizen who could enter the voting booth with a firm understanding of issues and clear-sighted view of candidates. And yet, to my left-leaning and somewhat privileged sensibilities, the outcome of the presidential election suggested an altogether opposing narrative. That a significant number of Americans had decided to shut down their critical thinking faculties and capacities and abandon acceptable norms of moral behavior to vote for a candidate wholly unfit for office. Mine was a simplistic narrative, of course. The factors affecting the election outcome were many and varied, including a deep distrust of incumbent politicians and an anxious realization that the new economy was leaving out more than a few Americans. Since the election, we have learned a great deal about the role of social media during and even after the campaign. This infographic, composed by a colleague, Emily Brown, from my first-year comp course, illustrates the seriousness of the challenge, especially taken with the number 15, number of people who actually spread most of the fake news in the 2016 election. Among the many lessons that I hope to impart in my first-year comp class is to make a distinction between fake news and coverage that seeks, however imperfectly, to get the facts straight. In other words, I highlight the difference between disinformation, the intentional dispersal of false information, and authentic efforts to establish a record of events. In that respect, in class, we view an infographic that highlights the challenge posed by fake news, topped by the news about the Pope's endorsement of Donald Trump. As contrast, we look at the implications of a reporter's corrections. That is, an effort on the part of a reporter to engage in further research to set the record straight. In this particular instance, corrections were made to a previously published story on the death of pop star Michael Jackson. Are such corrections evidence of phony or fake news, or rather the earnest effort to correct mistakes in initial coverage? I make the case for the latter interpretation, but I suspect in the current climate that many of my students are not inclined to give the benefit of the doubt to the media. Indeed, many of my students saw the coverage of Jackson's death as seriously biased and in many respects false. I reference the current climate and the oft-heard complaints about fake news as a way to frame a very old and very academic concern, the relationship between teaching and research. I know what you're thinking. Here we go again. We'll talk about valuing teaching at the university level as well-intentioned. The coin of the realm continues to be conventional research, or as Ernest Boyer termed it years ago, the scholarship of discovery. And despite the efforts by an influential scholar of the caliber of Lee Shulman back in the 90s to reclaim teaching as community property, an area of work that all teachers and researchers can rightfully claim as their own, the fact is that the divide between teaching and research remains significant. The establishment at many universities of a separate cadre of teaching faculty distinct from research faculty only exacerbates the problem and underscores the status differential between the two. By the way, teaching-intensive institutions such as community colleges are not innocent in the devaluation of both teaching and research. In continuing to rely on inexpensive contingent faculty to do the bulk of the teaching, faculty likely hired at the last minute, community colleges send out a clear message that teaching a course requires little preparation and that teachers themselves are interchangeable. In addition, community colleges send an equally loud message about the value of research by minimizing the importance of research and scholarship when awarding tenure. While some community colleges do offer points toward promotion for conference presentations, publications, and the like, most, to my knowledge, do not. And while in many community college systems, PhDs are becoming the preferred degree at point of hire, a skepticism toward the degree widely persists. If you have a PhD, the thinking goes, why would you teach 5 sections of introductory courses per semester? Of course, similar thinking permeates graduate programs. Why would you spend so much time and effort and money to obtain a doctorate and choose to squander those research skills at a college where the teaching load is 4.4 or 5.5? All this, of course, is old news. But I'm here to offer a speculative thesis and perhaps make old wine new. I wonder whether forces may be at work at this time to heal the breach between teaching and research, despite the fact that higher ed is under siege from both the right and the left, and that science, and more broadly intellectual inquiry, are being challenged as the property of the super elite. I'd like to focus on 3 reasons why I think the time may be right to bridge the gap between teaching and research. First, the drive to give students enhanced agency in classroom work has manifested both in the enduring role of undergraduate research and opportunities for what has been termed expansive learning. Second, the deprofessionalization or adjunctification of higher education and what I perceive to be a pushback from the public against this long-standing trend. And finally, what I will call the other Trump effect. By that I mean not the rise of white nationalism, as serious as that might be, but rather a recommitment by educators to confront the challenge of post-truth and the ubiquitous charge of fake news. Undergraduate research, setting aside a space in our classrooms and labs for genuine and creative research by students, has been with us for a very long time. Back in 1957, in a lecture often described as providing the foundations for undergraduate research, Edwin Land observed, and I quote, "One feels when among our young students that they are honest and honorable and full of ideals, that they come to the door of our universities with the dream of being our colleagues, that if we could provide them intimate leadership, there would be no discipline to which they would not subject themselves, and no task so arduous in the pursuit of knowledge and science that they would not devote themselves fully to it. But if we imply, as I believe we do by our present attitude, that we do not have this kind of faith in them, then their own strength wanes, and they cannot believe the best of themselves. What then should our attitude be, and how might we express it? While the emphasis on discipline and the insistence that our students might be dreaming to become our colleagues do not speak to my students or to the mission of my institution, I take to heart that the classroom may be the scene for the pursuit and creation of knowledge, and that our attitude, both expressed and implicit, can facilitate such a pursuit. As part of a research project on transfer knowledge, for example, I, along with several colleagues, have signed on to a curriculum that aims to place students in the role of theory makers and question posers. In this Teaching for Transfer curriculum, students are assigned inquiry-based research projects that encourage them to ask big questions that resist simplistic answers. Among the questions posed by my students, what are the causes of prisoner recidivism? Why do we laugh? Or how does music affect our bodies and minds? Rather than be driven by a reductive thesis statement for which supportive sources are cherry-picked, students leave themselves available to follow a variety of paths, depending on where their research takes them. Our own role must be facilitative rather than authoritative. Believe me, our students know the difference between the freedom to inquire and create and the restrictive and stultifying regime of school. One of my students, Brian, who was 37, returned to school after a gap of 10 years. He represented that difference in the form of a graphic memoir as part of inquiry-based research. I'm just going to read the narrative here. This is a graphic memoir. This was my high school, BMC Durfee High, Gold Hill Toppers. It was the halcyon days of the early 2000s, near the beginning of the school year, and just before 9/11. This was also where I experienced censorship for the first time. Please do not judge me too harshly. It was 2001, a very weird time indeed. And this was my art class, the last class of the day. The teacher, Mr. T, told us to draw whatever we wanted so he could walk around and assess our skills. The guy sitting next to me is Scooby. He was my only friend in the class until he graduated at the end of the year. When I asked him why they called him Scooby, he says because he loves doobie snacks. I didn't know what that meant until I was much older. As Mr. T walked around, he stopped at each table to make suggestions and small comments for each student and their drawings. When he got to me, he just looked at my drawing in disgust. He took my drawing from me and told me I can't draw things like that anymore. He then made me walk in front of the rest of the class to get another piece of paper to draw something new. I was embarrassed beyond belief. The next day, at the start of class, Mr. T called me up to his desk and handed me a piece of paper. I had been summoned to the guidance counselor. As I plodded down the hallway to my counselor's office, my heart raced. I had never been in trouble at school before. As I sat there nervously, my counselor explained to me that Mr. T reported me to her because of what I had drawn. Thankfully for me and my anxiety, my counselor found the whole thing absurd. She told me just to avoid Mr. T, that he was old and cranky and would be retiring soon anyway. Despite being exonerated of any crime, I spent the rest of the year worried I would get in trouble again. It felt like all my creativity was being hindered by fear. Fortunately, I gained a good friend in that class. Scooby, being the expert troublemaker he was, always had a knack for keeping any attention off of me and on himself. By the end of the year, Mr. T left, and a new teacher took over who really helped me flourish as an artist. And as for the offending picture I drew, this was basically it, just a smiling zombie holding a brain. Since high school, I've gained more confidence in myself, and I don't fear getting in trouble as much anymore. Centering someone simply because you have the authority and personally don't like something doesn't mean you should. If I had been supported by my counselor, my new friend, Scooby, and eventually my favorite teacher in the world, Mrs. Gaudette, I might never have followed my dreams. I think it's pretty cool. I'm going to leave that up for a bit. I recognize that the student's closing observation in some sense idealizes the classroom and the teacher's role in it. As an extreme an image is that of the wizened and censoring art teacher. In both cases, Brian does not claim full agency. Rather, in the end, he credits his counselor and his favorite teacher in the world, and to a lesser degree, Scooby. It might be helpful to point out, however, that in my class, Brian and his classmates were given the task of producing a composition in 3 genres, one of 4 major writing assignments in the Teaching for Transfer curriculum. For the project, students were to draw upon previous research from an inquiry-based research project and convey compelling findings via 3 different genres. Drawing from a long and diverse list of possible genres, students could choose and were prompted to choose genres in which they had some prior experience. An academic or personal essay, to note 2 examples. In his reflection on the assignment, Brian, who had decided to research censorship, describes something of his motivation, and I'm quoting from him. "I have to admit, I'm a little tired of thinking, discussing, and researching censorship. I do not mind the legwork, but it is such a drab subject. I think this is why I went to such extremes with my genre choices. It was a way to take all this old information I had and give it a new spin." There's a definition of transfer for you. "Since I had my pick of genres, it actually made it easier to focus a little more closely on a particular aspect of censorship and paint it in a new light. This is why I discussed internet censorship for my podcast, as it is an important subject to me, or why I chose book banning for my infographic," the other 2 genres he had chosen. "The infographic was required of all students, but the choice to produce a podcast, rightly titled the Brian Power Power Hour podcast, was entirely Brian's, as was the decision to draw his graphic memoir. I can't resist having you listen to part of that podcast." Let me see if we got it queued up here. There's a little music at the beginning.
Whoa, and welcome to the Brian Power Power Hour podcast. I am your host, Brian Power. Today's episode is brought to you by pizza. Pizza fueling American college students like myself since 1905. Pizza, get yourself a slice. Now, on today's episode, I answer a listener question about internet censorship. The listener asks, "What is internet censorship and why is it used?" Well, dear listener, what a great and difficult question. Firstly, I think we need to discuss just what the internet is. The internet is a system of interconnected computers from around the globe. Essentially, it is a large network made up of smaller networks. You can do literally almost anything on it. Like Jim Carrey says in this clip from the 1996 movie The Cable Guy,
"The future is now! Soon every American home will integrate their television, phone, and computer! You'll be able to visit the Louvre on one channel, or watch female mud wrestling on another. You can do your shopping at home, or play Mortal Kombat with a friend in Vietnam."
but if you don't know what the internet is by now, then how the heck are you listening to this anyway?
I could play more. He actually gets deeply into internet censorship and looks at the international scene as well, and does a marvelous job. And you also had a chance to listen to his voice, which is really important for me. Interestingly, in selecting unusual genres, Brian observes, he's not only able to give an old topic a new spin, He was prompted, not by me, but by the medium in which the genres are expressed, to expand his thinking about censorship beyond the banning of printed books to censorship on the net. Genre selection, in other words, prompts deeper inquiry. But it's his rationale for choosing the genre of graphic memoir that is most revealing, and I quote, "For my last genre, I illustrated a comic memoir. This was a bit of a cheat for me. As an artist and borderline narcissist, I found it easy to write and draw something from my own life. The chance to be artistically creative beyond writing for English class is too good of an opportunity to pass up. I have such an intimate love of comics that I wanted the chance to share that passion with others." I find Brian's use of the word cheat really interesting. Is it cheating to draw from prior experience when doing work in a classroom? It is if the classroom presumes that what students bring to classrooms is irrelevant and distracting from what is truly important. Is it cheating to aspire to be artistically creative in the classroom? It is, if the activity of learning requires merely the consumption of knowledge rather than its creation. Is it cheating to learn out of love and passion rather than merely necessity and compulsion? It is, if learning is reduced to what Dan Meltzer refers to as knowledge telling rather than knowledge making. Brian is not undertaking original research in the conventional sense, of course, but he is able to engage in what scholars call expansive learning, or expansive framing, or learning for that matter. Brian has an interest in graphic design and is given the green light to draw upon his prior interest and experience, with the potential to transfer what he learns in this project to other assignments in the future. What Brian calls cheating is in fact a natural and comfortable extension of his own experience, his experience in high school, but also his passion for comics to his work in his English class. I especially like the concept of sharing that passion with others. While I would not by any stretch suggest that the classroom be a place where students are free to do as they wish, I would hope, along with bell hooks, that the classroom and education more broadly might create the conditions for freedom. Freedom, for a student like Brian, may very well be an awareness of knowledge as portable, accessible, and ready to assist him in the challenges to come. Reflecting in his final assignment by way of a letter to his deceased mother, Brian shows a genuine understanding, both in word and deed, of knowledge that transfers, and I quote, "It can also make me a better artist and designer. For example, in graphic design, if I were hired to create a poster for a client, I would really have to think of what the purpose of the poster is, who the audience would be, and what kind of media and design the poster will have. I never thought that the lessons I learned in an academic class like English could possibly shift over to an artistic class for my eventual career. This is called learning and transfer, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It is learning a new skill or information and transferring the knowledge to a new subject. It's just like how you taught me to prepare all my ingredients before I cook and to clean as I go along. And now that is how I draw. I always get anything I might need, like my sharpener or pencils, and keep them handy. And I maintain a clean area so I do not have any accidents. I took what you taught me about one subject and utilized it in another. Just know that I'm taking everything you taught me about being a good person and a hard worker and transferring it into being a good student. And as a bonus, writing this letter to you has not only been cathartic, but has actually been my homework for major assignment number 4 as well. See, I took the lesson you taught me of working smarter, not harder, and utilized it in a different way. Many students at semester's end talk the talk about transfer, but don't really present evidence of genuine transfer. Brian does, I believe. His writing is purposeful, expansive, and future-oriented, to borrow terms from a recent study of what makes writing meaningful for students. In other words, presenting a case for how his work in class might benefit him later in his chosen field. At the same time, he recognizes that he owes a considerable debt to his mother's wisdom, a wisdom that would not be useful without a conscious application on his part. That's it. It's over. We're done. Oh, no, I didn't mean that, seriously. Pack up your things, move along. We've passed the point of resurrecting public higher ed as an institution. through which people can seek and find their intellectual, social, emotional, and economic potential. Mark the date, April 24th, 2018, the day public higher ed lost. So begins a column in Inside Higher Ed, written by John Warner, one of us. In his essay, Warner references an email published by Karen Kelsky in her blog, The Professor Is In. The email from Southern Illinois University Associate Dean for Budget, Personnel, and Research, Michael Molino, calls upon department heads to identify qualified alumni to join the SIU graduate faculty in a zero-time adjunct status. Warner continues, these blanket zero-time adjunct graduate faculty appointments are for 3-year periods and can be renewed. While specific duties of alumni adjuncts will likely vary across academic units, examples include service on graduate student thesis committees, teaching specific graduate or undergraduate lectures in one's area of expertise, service on departmental or university committees, and collaborations on grant proposals and research projects. Warner and Kelsky are right to be alarmed at what this initiative might bring about: a volunteer faculty, free labor to stand in for paid labor, giving institutions maximum flexibility to hire and fire faculty at will, and essentially deprofessionalize the professoriate. This seemingly radical move likely will be seen as a natural extension of the adjunctification of higher ed, the now long-standing reliance on cheap, disposable contingent labor. I raise this matter in the context of the teaching research binary for obvious reasons. When faculty labor becomes cheap, the first casualty in the value is the value attached to teaching. Research at R1 institutions continue to be done by full-time faculty. Teaching responsibilities reside more and more with second-tier, non-tenurable, or adjunct faculty. Contingent faculty, while attempting nobly to do well by their students, are surely influenced by the very conditions under which they work, shuttling from college to college, unable to spend time with their students, given little recognition for the work they do from colleagues and institutions, granted little in the way of professional development opportunities, and with little access to the office supports afforded to full-time faculty. In my state, adjuncts working at community colleges receive roughly $3,000 per course, do not receive health benefits, and for the most part do not share in college governance. They are not required to hold office hours or to be available to students outside the classroom. Here's the good news. The public has started to notice the problem. In the last several years, a slew of stories has appeared in traditional media such as USA Today and the New York Times, and of course social media, on the exploitation of contingent faculty. In addition, several research studies have found, hardly surprising to those of us in academia, that reliance on part-time faculty adversely affects retention of full-time students. At a time of declining enrollment, as we're seeing in public community colleges at least, and an increasing debt load among students across higher ed sectors, factors negatively impacting student retention may just receive the attention they deserve, including the now decades reliance on contingent labor. My point is this. I believe that such developments may very well be leading to a recommitment by colleges to their teaching mission. At my own community college, our new president has stated publicly a commitment to restore some kind of balance, that's her word, balance, between full and part-time faculty ratios, and has approved a greater share in governance for adjunct faculty, all this at a cash-strapped public community college. I also believe, and this is admittedly something of a stretch, more attention will be paid to researching the teaching and learning that take place in the classroom, given the huge financial investments of students and parents in a college education. Does it not make sense that faculty and administration alike promote and acknowledge efforts to research such matters as retention, persistence, and transfer? But who will undertake that research? I recall a conversation I had recently with Peter Adams, who, as you may know, led the effort to create the Accelerated Learning Program, or ALP, at the Community College of Baltimore County, a program that, according to Peter's own website, has now been adopted by more than 300 schools nationwide. Before originating the program, Peter undertook a careful research effort to determine the extent of the problem, the lack of retention in developmental courses, and inability of students to persist beyond the developmental course. Initiating a pilot co-rec program that would become the ALP, Peter did the requisite work to examine the impact on students. In our chat, Peter shared his concern that research currently being conducted on student retention and persistence, challenges most acutely felt at community colleges, is not being done by community college faculty and staff whose experience and insights would enrich such study. Plenty of reasons exist for why this is so, the intense and overwhelming teaching load being the most obvious reason, coupled with the absence of internal resources to support study and research. Contributing as well to the challenge is the dearth of experience or competence among two-year college faculty in designing systematic research projects. A few years ago, Holly Hassel, who is the current editor of the journal TETYC, saw the journal as a means to prepare two-year colleagues for the work, and I'm quoting from Holly. Greater attention should be paid in the journal to assisting readers and would-be writers with developing and executing successful research strategies, using qualitative or quantitative methods, conducting or funding research, collaborating with colleagues to answer research questions, or translating problems that occur in the classroom into profitable opportunities for inquiry. The word profitable is worth lingering on, prompting the following questions. Would it undermine the mission of teaching-intensive institutions such as community colleges to consider in the hiring process a candidate's experience and expertise in designing systematic research projects having to do with teaching and learning? Would teaching become less of a focus at community colleges if colleagues were given the means to examine its impact on students' learning? Would it hurt the bottom line if, having methodically researched factors affecting student retention and first-year composition, faculty led the effort to institute informed and innovative teaching and academic support that would enable students to succeed? To my mind, research can and should be used to promote student learning, improve teaching, and advance institutional knowledge. All this is not to imply a complete absence of research done by two-year colleagues within our discipline. Two-year college teacher scholars are engaging in research and are publishing their results in national journals. Take the subject of teaching for transfer, for example. I have personally drawn from and cited the work of colleagues from two-year colleges who've done significant research and have published their findings on transfer. Among those works that I've consulted are Mark Blauhera's Transfer Theory, Threshold Concepts, and First-Year Composition, Diane Fallon's, Cindy Lahar's, and David Sussman's Taking the High Road to Transfer, Building Bridges Between English and Psychology, and Holly Hassel and Joanne Barry Giordano's Transfer Institutions, Transfer of Knowledge, the Development of Rhetorical Adaptability in Underprepared Writers. It is worth noting that all of these articles were published in the journal TETYC and not in our field's flagship journal, 3Cs. It is also worth observing that while two of the three articles are included in the WAC compile bibliography, not one of the authors, nor any two-year colleague, as far as I can determine, has work included in recent edited collections on transfer, Understanding Writing Transfer, and Critical Transitions, Writing and the Question of Transfer. That seems like a good point to do that. Both published in 2017. I teach at community college. Anything is possible. I don't wish to rehash the old, if persistent, debate as to how well our field represents the work done at two-year colleges. After all, it's been more than 15 years that have passed since our late colleague John Lovelace wrote, "You cannot represent a field if you ignore half of it," referring to an overwhelming focus on four-year institutions and articles on basic writing in first-year comp and 3Cs. Change is occurring, if slowly, as a positive sign of greater collaboration between two- and four-year colleagues, for example. As I've been saying, I and two other colleagues from two-year institutions, Sharon Michler and Sonia Andrews, who are here, have worked with four-year colleagues on a Teaching for Transfer project, funded by the SEAS Research Initiative, to study the impact of the TFT curriculum across varied institutional contexts. This has been a richly rewarding experience for all of us involved. The TFT curriculum, whose aim is to provide students with a passport, equipping them to write successfully across varied contexts and situations, does so by emphasizing, by and large, a rhetorical framework and asking students to apply that frame to texts across varied genres and modalities. Since the November 2016 election, the effective deployment of key rhetorical terms such as genre, audience, purpose, and design, when sifting out the truthful from the fake in print and digital media, couldn't be more urgent than in this text-rich and post-truth era. The emphasis in TFT on textual analysis, the very first assignment is a source-based rhetorical analysis of a series of texts, has led me to foreground the explicit teaching of reading in my writing classes. I'd begun to move in that direction just prior to adopting the TFT curriculum. I'd co-edited with Patrick Sutherland and Sheridan Blau a collection of essays on deep reading. I'd already written about working collaboratively with colleagues Michelle Child and Emily Brown from our library on the challenge of reading a scholarly article. Michelle and Emily began by pointing out various design features in a particular essay, the complexity of title, the nature of collaborative authorship, and the function of the abstract. They turn to the literature review, a subgenre and regular feature of an academic article. Among the questions raised in class, what is the purpose of a lit review? If they're trying to convey their own accomplishments, why do authors reference the work of others? Establishing the author's credibility and ethos among intended readers, preparing the groundwork to show how the author's current project adds to the conversation among scholars. These are questions worth asking and asking in class. Other questions emerge when discussing scholarly writing. How do the authors begin to group or organize, and more precisely, synthesize sources in a lit review? By showing agreement, acknowledging opposing views, all the above? Oops, I'll get back to that. The TFT curriculum itself requires students to read texts closely and deeply, and most especially rhetorically. A consideration, for example, of Martin Luther King Jr.'s audience in his letter from Birmingham jail, 8 clergymen concerned that King's campaign against legal segregation was moving too quickly, sheds light on King's choice of the letter genre, his use of evidence drawn from the Bible, and on his respectful, if chiding tone to his peers. Similarly, an understanding of the genre of the commencement address, as well as his audience's youthful impatience, leads Billy Collins, when speaking to the graduating class at Colorado College, to play with his audience's expectations. He employs self-deprecating humor and avoids easy platitudes about the future, and above all, promises to keep his comments within 13 minutes. Brian, you haven't seen the last of Brian, whose work I drew from earlier, can discern Collins' rhetorical strategy. Brian writes, Collins knows that an audience listening to a commencement comes with certain assumptions. They're usually quite boring, with the listeners checking their watches. Knowing this, he starts by saying, it is well known in the world of public speaking that there's no pleasure you can give an audience that compares to the pleasure they get when it is over. So you can look forward to experiencing that pleasure 13 minutes from now. Instead of the usually stuffy speech full of cliches like reach for the stars and never stop learning, Collins uses humor and even recites poetry to great effect. Clearly, Brian has sat through a few of these commencement addresses and is able to use his prior experience as a way to frame his current encounter with Collins' writing. Brian begins to show promise in his ability to synthesize what he reads when he observes about the King piece, and I quote, but unlike Collins, King followed the general rules of his genre to better appeal to these men. As a fellow man of faith, King responded by writing a letter defending the actions taken by himself and the protesters. In his letter, King showcased an excellent understanding of who his audience was by utilizing religious rhetoric to support his actions. Brian does not dig deep here. He does not, for example, unpack what he means by the phrase religious rhetoric, nor does he expound on the general rules of the letter genre. But in his first formal assignment of the course, Brian shows promise as a careful and analytical reader of texts. As I circle back to where I started this talk, I wish to note this irony. At a time when truth is being challenged, at a time when we are saturated with information and disinformation, and at a time when science, knowledge, is being challenged not by faith but by ignorance, teachers K through 16 and beyond are stepping up to give students the tools they need to discern the truth of things. I Googled teaching and fake news and received over 61 million hits. Teachers at all levels, as well as educational groups, are coming up with and are publishing strategies for identifying falsehoods across genres and media. One nonprofit, the News Literacy Project, provides curriculum to over 3,000 educators in more than 60 countries. Classroom teachers are creating podcasts, videos, blogs, web pages in which they share their instructional methods in the service of seeking out truth. One enterprising professor of digital writing at USC, Mark Marino, is co-creator of a satirical course run by the Under Academy, containing various online seminars and reading lists. The tack here is, if you know how to fake news, you know how to spot it. Here's a taste of the Academy, if you want to call it that.
Welcome to a lesson in how to fake news as part of an Under Academy College non-certificate milling online course in journalism. Unemployed journalists, stay-at-home dads, and off-duty guidance counselors are making money hand over fist writing fake news. One faux author or frother claims to be making 10,000 smackaroos a month in ad sales. And we're not talking Bitcoin, brother. Our system is simple. When writing fake news, follow the 80-20-10 model. 80% true, 20% truish, and 10% truthless. Why fight fake news, chum? It's fun and profitable. Take a look at an example of one of the fake news stories from the recent election. Pope Francis shocks world, endorses Donald Trump for president, releases statement. Dateline, Vatican City. News outlets around the world are reporting on the news that Pope Francis has made the unprecedented decision to endorse a U.S. presidential candidate. His statement in support of Donald Trump was released from the Vatican this evening. I have been hesitant to offer any kind of support for either candidate in this U.S. presidential election, but I now feel that to not voice my concern would be a dereliction of my duty as the Holy See. A strong and free America is vitally important. Again, there's a whole lot of arguably true parts to this story, plus some extremely truish parts, all wrapped up in a shiny, truthless wrapper. To recap, 80% of the story should be the truth, what we hold to be self-evident, 20% truish or true enough, and 10% truthless, the truth of our dreams. And ladies, fake news has something for you too, for in fake news there are no glass ceilings. And if authority is a problem, we have one simple solution. Invent some. You can quote experts, friends, pets, your expert pet friends. For as the great Bart said, if you can put your words into the mouth of others, no amount of brushing or flossing will wash away the aftertaste. And don't forget to appear to be inclusive. Tokens are not just for arcades these days. Remember this last little fact. Last year, more people read fake news than less fake news by 3-1, according to various reports. We hope you have enjoyed this Under Academy College presentation, and you will enjoy our course in fake news. Thank you, and good night.
I note these developments for several reasons. Teachers, and they come from all sectors of education, take on a public role, educating beyond the classroom and for a civic purpose. In addition, teachers are making their own instructional methods public, showing in a very dramatic way the creative and effective approaches used in the classroom. In so doing, these educators are dispelling age-old stereotypes of fusty, out-of-touch, and generally unpractical teachers, and of the classroom as mysterious, irrelevant, and not of the real world. Teachers are mobilizing to meet the challenges of the moment, and their classrooms, as well as social media, are sites for meeting those challenges. Finally, and very importantly for my purposes here, we see so often in these public displays evidence of research drawn from and about the classroom. Teaching and research are closely and dynamically joined. Teachers situating, sharing, and reflecting on what happens in their classrooms. This is what I see as the other Trump effect. The mobilization of teachers to reflect on classroom methods and outcomes in order to deploy them effectively both in the classroom and beyond. Perhaps, as difficult as this current environment has been, it has forced us as educators to respond to the exigency of this moment, and as Brian's mother would have advised us, to have all our ingredients prepared before we cook, and all our pencils sharpened, and our areas cleaned before writing, so we do not have any accidents. Thank you very much.